Так. Good morning, everyone. Today we are having the last lecture dedicated on specific issues of forensic medicine. And today I'd like to start the forensic examination of firearm injuries. This would be a brief introduction to certain issues of firearm injuries. And if we would have time for it, we would try to continue some issues of traffic injuries. Well, we will not hesitate and start right now. Forensic examination of firearm injuries. First of all, we need to briefly discuss what the firearm weapon is. Firearm weapon is the device which launches the projectile using kinetic energy from burning explosive like gunpowder. At this particular picture, we see an illustration of revolver as one of the typical firearm weapons. Over here, there is a barrel. It's like the cannon to target certain projectiles to the particular direction. Over here, excuse me, this is the second slide. Over here, within the cylinders, there are cartridges or rounds. On next slide, we'll discuss it in details. There is a hammer to hit the bottom of the cartridge case and to ignite, to initiate burning. Over here, there is a trigger to pull it, and then the hammer hits the bottom grip, and many other items which are highly dependable on a particular type of firearm weapon. But anyway, the principle is the same. Cartridge is a little chamber where the gunpowder or another certain type of explosive is charged to, and it is fixed to the bullets or another projectile. At the bottom, there is a primer, highly explosive substance, little chamber with highly explosive substance, which is being initiated by the impact or even a pinch. It sets fire to the main chamber of the cartridge, and due to explosion, due to explosive burning of this particular explosive, there is a production of high amount of gases, many too much gases. These gases, they expand and they promote the bullet to go through the barrel and to be discharged from the cartridge case. That's what differs firearm weapons from another kinetic weapon, even air weapon, air guns, pneumatic guns, because in these air guns there is no explosion. Explosion is that very specific sign of firearm injuries and shooting from firearm injuries, and it enables us to understand that there was shooting from firearm weapons. Classification of firearm weapons. Firearm weapons could be classified by division them to certain groups. By their destinations, they could be divided to combat weapons. These are designed to be used in particular military activities. Basically, these are combat actions of different types. Service weapon. This is kind of law enforcement weapon, which is designed sometimes not to kill, but to stop, to immobilize the criminal, or to be used in limited spaces. Self-defense weapon. Self-defense weapon, they also could be used for specific purposes of self-defense. Criminal weapon is not that specific weapon. In most of the cases when we are saying criminal weapon, we are talking about the weapons which was facilitated to cause certain criminal activities. For example, barrels of the shotgun were shortened, or some modifications were made to enable certain criminal activities, like hiding a weapon, or maybe using semi-automatic weapon in a type of automatic when it's forbidden. Sport weapon. Sport weapon is the weapon which is used for sporting competitions, very special design. Hunting weapon is the weapon which is designed to hunt different animals, and depending on the animals they used to hunt for, they could have very different features and peculiarities. Classification of firearms by the charging and discharging system. It could be manual charging, then every next round is charged manually by hands. Semi-automatic weapon is the weapon which is using energy of the one shot to charge another round, but it cannot be used to shoot multiple times. For every shot, you must pull the trigger. Automatic weapon is the weapon where the one pull of the trigger launches the series of shots, and every next round is charged automatically by using an energy of the previous shot. By the canal construction, weapon could be divided to smoothbore weapon and rifle barrel weapon. These are types of the weapons that have very different features. Rifle barrel, over here on the picture, you see the incision of the rifle barrel weapon. They have grooves, specific grooves, spiral ones. This is necessary to spin the bullets, to make the bullets spin and then flame. This enables stabilization of the bullet, and it permits us to shoot precisely, to target specific targets well. Smoothbore weapon is the weapon which has the barrel in a type of cylinder or cone. This cylindric barrel weapon also used for specific purposes, mostly for hunting or for shooting in relatively short distances. So it also has specific purposes. And depending on the projectile, firearm weapons could be divided to weapons that using bullets, using bullet is the single piece of metal or different types of metals. projectiles in a type of shorts or pellets. They could be of different size, depending on the purpose. If one hunts birds or relatively large animals, a typical projectile in a shape of arrows or irregular particles, whatever. And gas weapon. Gas weapon also could be used to damage certain targets. It might have as the projectile some crystals of gas which is being evaporated in case of shot. Then due to burning of gunpowder, these crystals, they turn to little particles or even evaporate. Traumatic factors. What factors could cause trauma in case of shooting from firearm weapons? There are main or primary traumatic factors. These are bullets, pellets, hunting cartridge components. So these are items which are specifically designed to be discharged from the barrel. Second group are supplemental traumatic factors. This what accompanies shot, accompanies bullets and pellets. These are gunpowder gas, which is being produced, and then gunpowder is burning. This is flame, soot, particles of gunpowder grains, particles of metal, and so on. Secondary traumatic factors are the fragments of obstacles which bullet is passing through. For example, woods, glass, whatever. And it produces many fragments. And these fragments, they also might cause additional injuries. Even the bones of the human organism, bony fragments, sharp ones, could damage surrounding organs. And the last group of traumatic factors is the firearm itself. Parts of the firearms. Sometimes firearm might explode when shooting, or it might have some kind of moving parts. And these moving parts, they also could cause trauma to the one who's shooting and some other people. Projectile as the main or primary traumatic factors, it of course causes traumatic action. And there are different types of traumatic action of the projectile. First of all, one of the most common is the breaking action. Breaking action is the action which is appeared to be probably one of the most important. We see breaking action as the destruction of the tissues. It is seen due to high kinetic energy. High kinetic energy is shared to the tissues, and it leads to destruction of the tissues, deformation of the projectile, and hydrodynamic effect. Hydrodynamic effect is the effect which is seen that the bullet passes through the tissues with high concentration of fluid, high concentration of water. These could be cavities like stomach full of liquid food, heart, the chambers full of the blood, brain, which is having almost liquid consistency. And this hydrodynamic effect is the sharing of energy of the bullet to various directions, not only to direction of the bullet motion, but to almost every direction. This is produces so-called cavitation, phenomenon of cavitation, and sharing of pressure to all the direction. Due to this direction, it creates temporary pulsating cavities. These cavities are much larger than bullet itself, These cavities, they exist very little time, very little amount of time, microseconds, but due to enlargement of the tissues, limited in time but very severe enlargement, it leads to damaging of the surrounding tissues around the bullets. So bullet wound is not just a penetration, it's not just a puncture, as we see in case of puncture by nails or screwdrivers, for example. No, this is very severe trauma due to impact of the bullets, due to sharing huge amount of energy. Another type of the projectile action is the perforation and penetration. This is penetration to the tissues. This is what we can see. Then the bullet punctures the skin. We see so-called minus tissue defect. Over here in this picture, the yellow fragment is hit by the bullet and it is gone, it is absent. So when we examine skin after such an injury, we see no particular part of the skin. It is absent. There is no skin there. And this missed tissue is called minus tissue defect. It is the specific pattern of firearm injuries. But is seen, then the speed of the bullet is relatively high, more than 250 meters per second. If the energy of the bullet is not that high, if the velocity of the bullet is not that high, we might see so-called cuneiform effect. Cuneiform effect is seen when the bullet is still able to penetrate through the skin, but it does not produce minus tissue defect. It does not destroy the tissue completely. It just tears it. It makes a rupture and goes through this rupture beneath the skin. And if the energy of the bullet is low, if the velocity of the bullet is low, we might see contusion. Then the energy of the bullet is not sufficient to cause damage of the entire layers of the skin. This bullet, just like the piece of the stone, might hit the body, but anyway, it might produce severe contusions. Sometimes the fractures of the laying beneath bones and damages of the internal organs. Or we might see this in case of shooting to once protected bulletproof vests. In this case, trauma also might be severe due to sharing energy of the bullet. Bullet is not able to penetrate through the vest, but it shares its energy to the plates of the vest, and plates of the vest, they distribute this energy to the body, so it might lead to severe contusions. Supplemental factors of the firearm shot are gas, which might cause mechanical, thermal, and chemical effect. Mechanical effect of the gas is perforation in case of contact shot, or sometimes ruptures of the skin in case of close range shot. This means that the gas might affect the tissues, but only in relatively close contact. Thermal effect of the gas is seen because the gas is burning. It's accompanied to the flame. It is very hot, and we see burns of hair on the skin, and we see hyperthermia of the skin if the one is still alive. And once again, chemical effect of the gas could be distinguished by the effect of carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is one of the components of partially burned gunpowder, too much carbon monoxide there, so it leads to production of carboxyhemoglobin and carboxymyoglobin, which are having pinkish pinkish color of the blood, bright red color of the blood, and we see this, if we see such a coloring of the blood within a wound, it would be one of the signs, one of the evidences that this was relatively close range shot. Another supplemental factor effect is the effect of the flame. Flame might cause thermal effect, which is manifested as burns and hyperemia. Soot is the burned carbon, and it could be deposited as the upper picture around the wound. This is also an evidence of the relatively close range shot. And particles of metal and grains of gunpowder, they could be seen on the skin and within the skin around the central bullet wound, as at the bottom picture. Over here we see so-called tattooing, imprintment of the skin, the gunpowder grains and particles of metal. Secondary factors like stones, glass, clothing and footwear, and bones. These are factors produced when the bullet is penetrating through the certain obstacles. It breaks the obstacle, and some particles of the obstacles, they create additional fragments, and these additional fragments, they also cause certain injuries. Firearm itself as a traumatic factor is commonly seen in case of contact shot. Then the muzzle of the barrel of firearm is in contact with the skin or clothes of the victim. Like in this picture, we see so-called typical stamp mark or Stanzmarker from German language. It's the stamp imprint of the muzzle, which was contacting the skin. This muzzle was imprinted on the skin, then shooting. This is kind of surprising effect for some people, because most of the people know that firearm injuries is moving backward than shooting, not forwards. So it might not, it seems not hitting the skin. But indeed, what happens? If the muzzle is pressed to the skin, gunpowder gases following the bullets, they need space for enlargement, for expansion. And then they leave the canal of the barrel and start distributing beneath the skin. They lift the skin and they are moving skin towards the barrel. So this is not the barrel hitting the skin. This is skin hitting the barrel. Distances of shot. One of the important issues in forensic examination of firearm traumas. There are distances, different distances of shots. These are contact distance, close distance, and far distance. They are different for different types of the weapon, for different types of the cartridges. They cannot be measured in meters or centimeters for all the weapons together. For the particular weapon using particular cartridges, yes, this is possible, but distance of shot helps us to understand, was really one who was shooting close enough to be seen well, to be contacted. So for forensic purposes, as I've said, there are three distances: contact one, close one, and a long one, a far range shot. In case of contact shot, the barrel is pressed to the skin or to clothes of the victim. That's why we see muzzle imprints in this case on the skin. All the supplemental factors are mostly seen within the wound canal, not around it, but within it. In case of close range is the distance which is limited of the distance of reach of the supplemental factors. As long as supplemental factors might reach the target, there is a close range. If we see effect of supplemental factors, flame, gas, gunpowder, there is a close range. Then the distance is beyond the range of flying of supplemental factors. This is far or long distance. That's why close range shot is always accompanied with distribution of particular additional factors like soot, gunpowder grains, particles of metals around the wound. If in case of contact shot, they were mostly found within the wound canal. In a close range, they are found around the entrance wound. And in case of far range shot, there is no effect of the supplemental factors on the target. Just bullet or pellets affects the body. One of the another important issues of forensic examination of firearm injuries is the differentiation of entrance and exit wounds. Usually, the difference could be distinguished in relatively easy manner because they are really different, these two types of the wound. But in some cases, might be problematic. But in a typical cases, an entrance wound has round or oval shape of the inlet opening. In case of exit wounds, it could be stellate with many flaps of the skin arched, or might have the appearance of clefts, whatever. So the shape is typically irregular, minus tissue defect, absence of the tissues is seen in case of entrance wound and absent in case of exit wound. What does that mean? Tissue is torn, but anyway, if we would collect all the flaps, put them together, they would cover this opening. So no absence of the tissue. But in case of entrance wound, absence of the tissue is seen well. In case of damage of the bones, flat bones, like bones of the skull or bones of the pelvis, we see conic shape of the wound canal within the bones. And the conus direction for the entrance wound is directed inside. That means that the larger base of the cone is directed inside to the same direction of the bullet motion. And cone direction of the exit wound on the skull is directed outside of the skull. Dimensions, size of the entrance wound is usually smaller than exit wound. Margins of the entrance wound are usually regular, and margins of the exit wound are irregular. Ring of the abrasion, ring of metallization, deposits, different deposits of additional factors and supplemental factors are seen around the exit wound and absent around the entrance wound. All of them, these deposits are seen around the entrance wound, but absent around the exit wound. That would be correct. And just a few words about shotguns and cartridges for shotguns. The principles are the same, but the difference is the presence of multiple projectiles, like pellets, and watts. These are barrier which is separating charge from the projectile to prevent mixing them. Also, this watt is working as a plunger at the moment of shot, pushing projectile through the barrel. And also it might serve as additional traumatic factors. Out here in this picture, we see different distances of shot from such cartridges. At the first picture on the left, we see relatively compact effect. The distance was very long. The distance was relatively close. Compact effect. Most of the projectiles were acting as one single projectile, one single bullet. So that's why we see central damage and a relatively absent separated injuries by the pellets. On the second picture in the middle, we see multiple but relatively large damages. These are groups of pellets affecting the body. And if you would look to the right part of this picture in the middle, you would see a roundish shape injury. This is the effect of the watt, because the watt was also discharged from the barrel, and it also affects the body. And out of combat action, relatively long distance, we see independent injuries caused by different pellets. This is a brief information about the firearm injuries for today. Let's make a little break. We're about 3 minutes, and after that we will continue discussing certain aspects of the raw traffic injuries. 3 minutes break. Well, let's continue. Brief description of certain aspects dedicated to road traffic injuries and forensic examination of traumas obtained in case of road traffic injuries. Road traffic, oh, excuse me, this is not exactly road traffic accidents. Excuse me, something wrong is going on. Well, let's continue. Road traffic accident, they might be sustained to pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists, or occupants of the vehicles. These are the most common types of the people who's been suffered different damages and injuries in case of road traffic accidents. Traffic accidents is the mostly collision or run over by the car, which could be the source of different traumas. Injuries to pedestrians. Pedestrians might obtain certain types of injuries, so-called impact injuries or primary impact injuries, then vehicle strikes the victim. Secondary injuries, then victim is falling on the ground or striking another objects, another stationary objects, and run over injuries due to a vehicle running over some part of the victim. These are most common types. Impact injuries. They could be divided to the primary impact injuries and so-called secondary impact injuries. Primary impact injuries are the injuries obtained due to initial impact by vehicle. This is also these are injuries which might have very specific pattern because different projections of the vehicle, different protruded parts of the vehicle might cause specific injuries to the particular parts of the human body. And height of the pedestrian, height of the car, height of the vehicle also determines site of the injury and even type of the injury. Secondary impact injuries are the injuries which are caused during the subsequent impact of the same vehicle, but in other parts of this vehicle, not the most protruded, not the most prominent parts. Secondary injuries are injuries which are obtained when the pedestrian is falling on the ground or surrounding items. And run-over injuries are the injuries seen in case of run-over, in case of crossing of some parts of the victim's body by the car. Severity of such injuries depends on the parts of the body which is being ran over, and it also depends on the weight of the vehicle, type of the tires, and type of the ground, type of the surface the victim is being situated on. These are so-called degloving injuries. Then the skin is being separated from the body, tire marks, burns, avulsions, and so on, etc. Primary impact injury is the so-called bumper impact. In most of the cars, the more prominent part of the car is the bumper, most protrusive part. The bumper impact is seen at the level of the leg, usually on tibia or fibula, sometimes at the level of knees, and if there are children, this primary impact might be seen on area of femur and pelvis. Secondary impact injuries, the middle picture, are seen when the one is falling onto the car, falling onto the vehicle, and being hit by the windshield, by the roof of the car, and any other parts of the moving car. And secondary injuries, the bottom picture, is seen then the victim is falling away from the car, falling onto the ground, or and other obstacles. In primary impact injuries, we mostly see primary impact injuries on the levels of the legs. Are they here? They are shown approximately. Importance of the primary impact injuries is that this particular part of the human body might bear some patterns of the most protruding parts. For example, some logos of the car or grid of the car might be imprinted on the skin, might be seen and studied by the forensic examiner. Most protruding part, the first one is the bumper, wing of the car, grill of the car, headlight, fender, radiator, or door handle, depending on the type of the impact. Is it direct or tangential? The body part which bears injury depends on position of the person. It depends on was the pedestrian struck by the front of the car or side of the car, was he or she standing on the road or walking on the road or laying on the road. If the vehicle was braking violently in the moment of impact, the front end of the vehicle dips down and the leg gets injured at the lower level if the vehicle was decelerating in a violent manner. It also depending on the leading wheels of the vehicle. Are these vehicles the front ones or the rear ones? Injury, primary impact or injury, is usually comprises of damage of the skin and fracture of the bone, so-called bumper fracture. The bumper fracture usually involves tibia, but it depends on the level of the fracture. This fracture usually has the shape of the wedge, and the base of this triangular wedge is indicating the site of the impact. And apex of the wedge is pointing towards the direction of motion of vehicle. Sometimes bumper fractures on different legs, they could be situated on different levels. This is evidence of probably moving of the pedestrian, walking or running or jumping at the moment of the impact. Over here on this picture, you could see the tibia with a wedge-shaped injury shown on the picture. The base of the wedge demonstrates your area of contact, and the apex of the wedge shows the direction of the car motion. Uh, if the bumper fracture is found on the same level on both legs, this, in most of the cases, is evidence that the person was standing. In this case, this is mandatory to check. Actually, in all of the cases of the pedestrian injury, it's mandatory to check if the one is dead, to check organs of vision and organs of hearing, to make sure that the one wasn't blind, wasn't deaf, was able to see and hear approaching car. If the one is alive, there is also mandatory to check it if the one was able to detect car approaching to him. Secondary impact injury. Secondary impact injury is the injury which is seen when the one is falling onto the car, falling on the hood or windscreen. And during this period, during this phase, one might get severe injuries of different parts of the body. But after the second impact injury, the victim will be thrown on the ground. Due to sliding, due to motion on the ground, one might obtain extensive abrasions, bruises, and lacerations. Sometimes severe damages of the skin. Due to impact on the surrounding objects, they could be accompanied with traumas of the bones and traumas of the internal organs. Sometimes a pedestrian might be run over by the same or next vehicle. In case of run over, we might see tire marks, which are specific signs of run over. Tire marks, they could be found on both areas covered with the clothes and areas which are unclothed. On the skin, on the tissues, there are so-called negative tire marks. Now, these are bruises, imprints, and positive tire marks. They could be seen on both skin and clothes. These are particles of dirt, mud, different deposits from tire, which are seen as in case of soiling of the particular surface. As a result of run over, we might see specific injuries like degloving, separation of the skin, accumulation of the blood and tissue debris within these pockets of separated skin. At the same time, we see smashing and crushing of the particular parts of the body. Flail chest might be seen, flattening of the head, depending on the area of run over. Flail chest, flail segment is seen, then few ribs are damaged almost at the same level. Secondary injuries are seen when the victim is thrown off the vehicle onto the ground. If the victim sustains secondary injuries from the ground or in other obstacles, walls of the buildings and other cars, and other obstacles, other elements of the environment. There are many types of injuries which might be seen after that phase, but most of them are injuries of the blunt impact. Traumas of the head, traumas of the vertebral column are very common for that period of of traffic trauma. Injuries caused by motorcycle and cycle. Injuries which are sustained by motorcyclists are usually very serious compared to the ones that were being did in the car cabin, because instability of two-wheeler vehicles, lack of protection, and usually rush, which is seen in motorcyclists. Common causes of motorcycle accident or consumption of drugs and alcohol, different environmental factors which prevent motorcyclists from normal control of the situation, and different sorts of reckless driving and failure by drivers of the car to same motorcyclist. The most common cause of motorcycle fatality is running off the road, and motorcyclists gone off the road and hit different obstacles. Most injuries in this case are obtained due to ejection of motorcycles from the vehicle. Then motorcyclist is being thrown, usually to the relatively long distance, and might hit surrounding areas, surrounding environmental components. Primary injuries are mostly fractures of the tibia and fibula. These injuries are seen due to impact on the elements of motorcycles, and the secondary injuries are mostly fractures of the skull and fractures of element of the chest, and these includes ribs and vertebral column and breastbone. Injuries of the head are very common for motorcyclists. And the next, which is following the head injury, are injuries of thoracic and abdominal region. Following the side impact to the head causes fractures of the base of the skull, especially hinge-type fractures. Impact on the face causes fractures of the facial bones, facial skull. Impact on forehead causes sagittal fracture of the base. Impact on the chain causes mandibular fracture and also fractures of the cervical part of the vertebral column. And impact on the crown of the head by fall may cause fractures of the rim. Specific fractures at the base of the skull, which has high fatality, severe fatal outcomes. And last part of the 2 days lecture to talk about injuries to occupants of the vehicle. Driver and other occupants of the vehicle. After pedestrians, they are most frequent casualties in road traffic accidents, because high proportion of the vehicles are occupied only by drivers. Ejection of the driver and passenger from vehicle is associated with significantly severe injuries or fatality, as the door often bursts open. Sometimes ejection of the driver and occupant of the vehicle, passenger of the vehicle, could be seen through the windshield due to breakage of the windshield, and driver and passenger being unbelted, unfastened. Rear seat occupants, they also have high risk of being ejected, and they also set a specific damage to other occupants of the vehicle, because rear seat passengers, due to the front impact, they could move forward and additionally load front seat passenger or driver, pressing them making severe compression between the elements of the car and rear seat passengers. Injuries of the driver and passenger depend on the type of the car, type of the impact of the car crash. It could be front impact crash. This is seen when one car strikes another car head-on or strike a stationary object. Approximately 80% of the impacts. In this case, we see specific injuries of the driver. Driver obtains injuries of the face, obtains injuries of the abdomen by the steering wheel, fractures of the hands and wrists because the hands are situated on the steering wheel in most of the cases. Fractures of the vertebral column, basically at the cervical region, traumas to the feet and traumas to the hip joints because lower extremities are usually situated on the pedals, and due to effect of the pedals, these parts of the body might be damaged seriously. Front seat passenger usually obtains trauma of the forehead, parietal areas because of high flexure of the cervical column, fracture of cervical column itself. Fractures of the bones of the hands and wrists are less common. Trauma of the abdomen is also less common, but the trauma of the front part of the thoracic region is relatively common due to impact of on the protruding parts of the car. There are also seen traumas of the knee at the areas of knee joint and hip joint and fractures of the femur. Rear impact crash. In case of impact by another car from the backside, low velocity rear impact are relatively common and they are perceived by the most of the drivers as something of negligent danger, but sometimes they could cause even the low velocity rear impact. They could cause severe traumas like whiplash injury and fractures of the neck. It seems to be they're rare in the low velocity, but sometimes, if not fixed properly, they could lead to serious complications and traumas. Whiplash injury is seen then the head is moving. Even if the body is fixed by the seatbelt, the head is usually unfastened. In most of the typical cars, at the moment of the rear impact, head goes backwards because the body goes forwards due to pushing. It leads to severe overextension of the cervical part of the vertebral column. But next to it, head goes forwards, sometimes even elongating the neck, pulling the neck, and which had been overextended before. And due to this very fast motion, initially backwards and then forwards, like a whiplash motion, it might cause to crushing of the bony fragments, ruptures of the ligaments, and ruptures of the intravertebral cartilaginous discs. This so-called whiplash trauma might be often accompanied by the traumas of the spinal cord or even certain axonal pathways. And that's why it might lead to severe nervous disorders after the trauma. The typical type of the rear impact, basically of relatively low motion rear impact, but it is seen as the result of negligence than driving. And side impact crash. Side impact is saying that one vehicle strikes the side of another vehicle. Depending on the side of the impact, injuries might be different to the passenger and to the driver, but usually the person which is sitting on that side of the impact is getting more severe injuries. Injuries are usually severe enough because metal pieces of the car, like doors, they affecting human body in a very severe manner, like in this case. Due to breaking of the glass, one might get some injuries related to cutting of the skin, injuries of the eyes, accompanied with severe bleeding, and blunt trauma of the internal organs of thoracic and abdominal regions. Roll over crash or run over. In roll-over crash, an automobile is being pushed off the road. It might roll and might, in this case, if the passenger there is unfastened or the driver not fixed properly, injuries might be very severe. Not belted occupants involved into two types of the injury: tumbling around inside and striking the interior of the vehicle, and ejection from the vehicle, sometimes with smashing beneath the vehicle. Roll the seat belts and airbags. These safety features are designed to prevent severe injuries, but they also could be the source of danger. As you can see at this picture, it prevents impact on the face of the driver to the steering wheel, but at the same time airbag and then being expanded also might cause additional traumas, but not that severe as what would be if the one would hit the steering wheel. Wearing seat belts indeed reduces risk of fatal injuries to the front seat occupants almost by half. But although seatbelts, they reduce mortality, they could cause specific pattern of the internal injuries, which also enable us to produce certain forensic examinations. This is what was tended to be taught today. Today was your last lecture dedicated to the specific issues of the forensic examination. Lecture course is over, And those of you who have your practical, so-called practical classes, have your practical classes passed, with no depths to be completed, you might consider yourself as the one who had passed the course of forensic medicine. If your practical classes are only upcoming, get ready to them. You might use your lecture course to get prepared, but this is not the only source of information. Don't forget to use books. Don't forget to use information which have been given to you for particular classes, and see you on classes. Thank you very much for your attention. That's it for today. Thank you.